This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. Compilations. There have been quite a few over the years, haven't there? Loads in the Pi era, just keep coming out, keep churning out, even till today. I think you can walk into most music shops and find a Quo Pi era compilation there somewhere, and obviously all the material that they've produced afterwards. There's been various different ones. There's been ones on the cover versions, there's been sort of 70s ones, there's been various ones where it's like they've just thrown a bunch of recordings they happen to have the rights to on it. There's all kinds of different ones, but there have been many a number of official ones, such as the 12 Gold Bars series in the early 80s, which is still very popular today. I think it's possibly one of the most revered of the Quo compilations, simply because I think it introduced a lot of people to the band, as they were starting to halt their first chapter, if you will. And then I think the next big one was like 5 or 6 years later, rocking all over the years, and we've had Whatever You Want, the best of Status Quo. We've had very recently Quoing In, the best of the noughties, and various ones, Except No Substitute. And slap bang in the middle of everything, we had Excess All Areas, the greatest hits, which was released 20 years ago in September, and it did relatively well. It was just outside of the top 10 of the UK album charts, but the thing is, it was like 6 or 7 years after Whatever You Want, the best of Status Quo. But this one, I think, is probably one of their better ones, because it chose to do things a little bit differently. Because when I look down the track listing and I see the usual, Caroline, Down Down, Paper Plane, even Roll Over, Lay Down, Break the Rules, Something About You Baby, all of those, just saying them in a random order, really, in the end. You've got other tracks, album tracks, such as Big Fat Mama and 4,500 Times, and Creeping Up on You, and the early 2000s version of Down the Dust Pipe, so there's some relatively deep cuts in there. And so I kind of think of this as more of a greatest hits of the live show, where they've kind of picked out their favorite tracks that they have performed live over the years. The front cover with Rossi and Parfit rocking out in a mid-70s image would kind of attest to that's kind of what they've done there. And of course, this tied into the release of the Status Quo autobiography, the second one in 10 years from Francis Rossi and Rick Parfit. I did read it about 15 years ago. I must go back to that at some point. But another thing that makes this compilation special is that it has two new for then tracks on it. Two tracks that had never been heard before, released before, recorded before, absolutely brand spanking new. Now, you might be thinking, well, they've done that occasionally. Yeah, it is quite a common trope, I think, for older bands to do that. They'll release the greatest hits and they'll have a new track on it. But before that, for Quo, in Volume 2 of the 12 Gold Bars compilation, they had their single at the time, The Wanderer. I guess that counts because it hadn't been on an album previously, but it was a cover version. Fast forward to Rockin' All Over the Years, they had Anniversary Waltz, Part 1, but it was a cover version. This is two brand new tracks written by the writing partnership, legendary writing partnership, of Francis Rossi and Bob Young, who got back together writing 2 to 3 years prior to this, with their first kind of standing thing being the Heavy Traffic album. There's so many Rossi Young classics on there. And this compilation, I think, is boosted by the fact it has these two things on it. And the amazing thing as well is, to promote the album, they released those two songs in the chart. And you know, these days when they release a single and it doesn't really do anything, does it? It goes up on download and they might do like a physical version and you might see it in the physical chart maybe, but it won't even bother like the top 50 or whatever. This was an era where Quo, pre the downloads and streaming counting towards the chart, was still quite heavy-weighty when it came to releasing singles. They would release songs. Now, up until this point, they had, in the last sort of 5 years prior to these songs being released, they had done a series of singles, most of which were sort of in the latter stages of the top 40, if not more. The exception to that was the single Jam Side Down in 2002 that got to number 17 in the UK charts and, you know, was sort of seen as a comeback, if you will. And one of their last appearances on Top of the Pops too, the last one being the single The Party Ain't Over Yet. These two singles, Thinking of You and the first one to be released, You'll Come Round, did marginally better, I would say, than Jam Side Down, and was probably the most successful, you know, singles period in quite a while. Talking about You'll Come Round, released in September 2004, around the same time as Excess Hilarious, written by, as I say, Francis Rossi, Bob Young, or as it's written here, Young Rossi, and the chart position is actually 14 in the UK chart. So that was its peak position, 3 places above Jam Side Down. And yet I don't hear a lot of people talking about it now. But I remember when I first heard it, I almost had to, if you pardon the pun, come round to it. It was a bit of a difficult thing because it sounded very commercial, had lots of guitar sound. I mean, I don't think they'd gone that big on the guitar for quite a while. You know, really up in the mix. Mike Paxman produced it, and I think it was the chorus because it kind of sticks on that one chord and it goes down a bit and then back up again. And it's the way that Francis kind of sticks at the top of that melody line, which on first listen, you know, I didn't really like that much. But as I kept listening to it, I came round to it. It's really rocking. It's got a great solo in it that doesn't stay for too long. And the thing about this particular era is this one, Thinking of You, and The Party Ain't Over Yet, had mixes, special mixes for the radio. So you'd be listening to the radio and this big sound would come out of the radio and it would be this thing. And then you'd go and buy Accessible Areas and it would be kind of the same, but just a little bit more toned back. So maybe that's how so many people bought the single, because they realized it was different recordings. And obviously as well for fans, You'll Come Round also had the B-side of Lucinda, which is a great Rick and Rhino track. It really goes full pedal to the metal, doesn't it, if that's the right phrase to use here. You'll Come Round, I might be wrong in thinking there was a single mix. I'm sure when I've listened, it just sounds a little bit fuller to me. So we'll go on to Thinking of You, which was released in November 2004, which definitely has a different mix because the lead guitar in the front, that intro, is much bigger. You know, there's so many more kind of harmonies and harmonizing guitar parts in there. And it's a lot more of a Quo chugger, I think. Whereas the other one's like, that's a really nice melody with some kind of interesting decisions made in it. Thinking of You is just your standard Quo chugger, which has got that killer kind of really jiggy kind of riff that we know that Francis likes so much. And I think I actually heard that track played by a Quo tribute band a couple of years ago. It might have been Heavy Traffic, now known as the Quo Story. And it hit me when I heard it live, in that sense, just how good that kind of that lead riff and intro and stuff is, and how powerful it is. And listening back to the recording, hearing Rossi and Parfit harmonize with each other and going, that's the sound of Quo. We've got that da 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 da, and we've got those two harmonizing, and then we've got this kind of rock solid groove going on. That is Status Quo. You know, I really, I personally feel quite nostalgic for that. The track actually got to number 21 in the UK charts, which for a band of Quo's vintage is quite impressive. Those two tracks, You'll Come Round, Thinking of You, I don't hear people talking about them very much anymore. They don't sort of come up, and I think You'll Come Round is a bit of an underrated gem, because it's just that they're both really pure Quo, aren't they? In the kind of more commercial sense, in what we've come to know as Status Quo. The demos for the two tracks are out there somewhere, haven't they? I've certainly heard them. And they have pretty much the same layout. You know, Francis in his studio knocking out these things. I'd almost say that with Thinking of You, it kind of sounds like they've taken the intro off of the demo, but it has been a while since I heard it, so I might be wrong. It's just what I remember. But this track, you know, was laid out from the off, and I think it shows Francis' attention to detail and the fact that they can nail it, and when they go into the studio, it just gets taken to another level. It gets quoed up. So tell me, what do you think of these two tracks, You'll Come Round and Thinking of You? Do you think of this as kind of an underrated era? What did you think of Excess All Areas? Please do let me know in the comments below.